Have you ever seen an innocent teen turn the tables on corrupt cops? 18-year-old black girl falsely accused by cops, everyone in court shocked when she flashes CIA badge. Hands up, don't move, the sharp command sliced through the evening air, making Imani Carter freeze in her tracks. Just moments ago, she had been walking home, thinking about her future at Howard University. Now, she was staring down the barrels of police guns, accused of a crime she didn't commit. Her heart pounded. She wanted to explain, to show them her ID, to tell them the truth, but the look in their eyes told her it wouldn't matter. And when they found the badge in her bag, the one with the CIA emblem, everything took a turn no one saw coming. What happened next would shake the entire system. Stay tuned, because this story is one you won't believe. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this from Dark Stories. At 18, Imani Carter was finishing her senior year at Benjamin Banneker with top honors. She had just been accepted to Howard University on a generous scholarship, her dream college located right in the heart of the city she loved. It was early April, and she had plans to celebrate her acceptance with her mother that evening, maybe even treat Dana to dinner at a local family restaurant. On that fateful afternoon, Imani left school later than usual, having stayed behind for an emergency meeting of the debate club. She took the usual bus, the number 7, which zigzagged through some of the busiest streets in Northwest D.C. Imani always carried a backpack filled with thick textbooks, physics, calculus, U.S. government, and a separate pouch that held her laptop. Nestled discreetly within a hidden compartment of that pouch was a small ID badge. The name on it read Imani Carter, and the emblem etched in the corner was the unmistakable crest of the CIA. She'd been given the badge only a few months prior, a final step before she'd be fully enrolled in an extended training program the following summer. Can you believe what happens next? The bus ride was uneventful, just a sleepy array of students, office workers, and exhausted parents heading home. Imani stepped off near Brightwood, intending to walk the remaining few blocks. It was almost dusk, the sky tinted with pinkish orange as the sun descended beyond the horizon. That's when it happened, a sudden commotion around the corner. 3 police cars were converged in front of the rundown convenience store Imani often passed on her way home. Their lights flashed in harsh reds and blues, painting the alleyway in strobing, disorienting color. Imani felt her stomach knot. She sensed that something was off, even from a distance. She recognized the tension in the officer postures, their voices rose in angry shouts, although Imani couldn't make out the words from where she stood. Cautiously, she tried to skirt around the commotion, but before she could disappear behind the next block, a voice yelled, "Hey, you, stop right there." She froze, uncertain if the shout was directed at her. A second call confirmed it. "You, girl in the hoodie, hands up." Aman's heart hammered. She wasn't wearing anything out of the ordinary, a worn black hoodie, jeans, her backpack slung over one shoulder. This was standard Aman attire. Still, fear pulsed through her. She lifted her hand slowly, her eyes darting around to see if there was anyone else who might intervene. A couple of onlookers stood at a distance, recording the unfolding scene on their phones. 2 police officers approached, their hands already on the grips of their sidearms. The older officer, whose name tag read O'Donnell, glared at her. "What are you doing here?" Iman's voice trembled despite her efforts to remain calm. I'm just heading home. I live a few blocks away." The younger officer, labeled Marston, interjected. "We're looking for suspects in a robbery that took place earlier today." "You matched the description." Confusion washed over Imani. She couldn't imagine how she could match any description. She'd been in school all day, and plenty of classmates and teachers could vouch for her whereabouts. "But I don't," Officer O'Donnell snapped. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Panic clawed at her chest. Imani wanted to assert her rights, but she remembered her mother's warnings about dealing with the police: keep your voice steady, don't make sudden moves, don't argue, or they might consider you a threat. She nodded mutely. Marin yanked Aman's arms behind her back, slapping cuffs on her wrists tighter than necessary. As Imani winced, O'Donnell launched into a quick search of her backpack. He rummaged through her physics textbook, her lunch container, her notebook riddled with debate club notes. Then he found the laptop pouch and pried it open. His brow creased at the sight of Imani's CIA internship badge. "What is this?" he demanded, holding up the small ID card like it was contraband. Iman's brain scrambled. She wanted to keep her internship quiet, as per the confidentiality agreement, but right now, it was the only thing that might help prove she wasn't some random suspect. "If it's a government internship ID," she said softly. Officer O'Donnell let out a snort. "Don't insult our intelligence," he growled. "This is some fake badge you had printed. Think you're clever?" Before Imani could respond, O'Donnell slammed the pouch shut, pocketing the badge. "We'll check this out at the station," he muttered, as Imani was shoved into the back of a squad car. Tears welled up in her eyes. She knew this was bad, very bad. Her mother would be worried sick, and Aman's worst fear was that she'd end up another statistic, another name on a long list of people of color unfairly detained or harmed by law enforcement. She could already imagine the headlines, though no one would care enough to print them, promising honor student charged in robbery. The officer slammed the door, the sound echoing in Aman's chest like a judge's gavel. She tried to breathe, tried to stay calm, telling herself this was some horrific misunderstanding. Surely, it would be resolved once they checked her school attendance records or spoke with her teachers. But as the squad car pulled away, Imani saw the future she dreamed of: Howard University, the CIA internship, her entire life plan dangling precariously, about to slip right through her fingers. Hours passed in a blur of humiliation and fear. Imani sat on a cold metal bench at the precinct, her cheeks damp with tears she tried to wipe away with her shoulder since her hands were cuffed behind her back. Officer O'Donnell and Officer Marston were in and out, sometimes sneering at her as they walked by, other times saying nothing at all, ignoring her presence entirely. She had no idea what was happening on the other side of that locked door, whether they were actually searching for evidence of her involvement in the alleged robbery or simply stalling. In the back of her mind, Imani clung to the hope that eventually they'd let her make a phone call. She repeated her mother's number in her head, a mantra she'd known since she could first speak: 202-555-4937. She could recite it in her sleep. Finally, an officer she hadn't seen before, an older black woman named Detective Morgan, entered the holding area. She looked Imani over, eyes flickering with something that might have been empathy. "All right, Miss Carter, let's get you processed," Detective Morgan said quietly, reaching into her pocket for a key. Imani breathed a tiny sigh of relief when the cuffs were removed so she could be fingerprinted and photographed. The fluorescent lights overhead made everything feel surreal, as if Imani was stuck in a nightmare. She tried to form words to ask if she could call her mother, but the knot in her throat made it hard. Detective Morgan must have sensed Aman's distress, because she gestured to a phone on a nearby desk. "After we finish here, I'll let you make a call." Those few words were like a lifeline. Imani nodded, blinking back tears. She could still feel the stares from some of the officers standing around. It wasn't lost on her that she was young, black, and female, and that for too many law enforcement personnel, that alone was enough to cast suspicion. Once the fingerprinting was done, Imani was escorted to a phone. Detective Morgan stood nearby, discreetly out of earshot. Imani dialed home, heart thudding with anxiety. On the fourth ring, Dana answered. "Hello?" "Mom," Iman's voice cracked as soon as she heard her mother's voice. They arrested me." She could hear Davina's gasp. "Arrested, Imani? What on earth happened? Where are you?" Iman's explanation tumbled out in halting bursts: the store, the police, the false accusation. Dana cut her off, not angrily, but urgently, telling Imani to stay calm. "I'm on my way." "I'll call Mr. Clean," she said. Mr. Clean was an old family friend, a local lawyer with a small practice who had helped the Carters with legal matters before. The call ended, but Imani felt marginally better, knowing help was coming. Over the next few hours, Imani was questioned by Officer O'Donnell and Officer Marston. They insisted they had an eyewitness who claimed someone matching Aman's description had been acting suspiciously near the convenience store earlier in the day. They also pointed to her presence near the scene as evidence of potential involvement. Imani explained time and again that she was at school during the alleged robbery, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Each time she tried to bring up her perfect attendance record or mention that her teachers could confirm her whereabouts, the officers would scoff or roll their eyes. They also mocked her supposed fake CIA badge. No matter what Amani said, it felt like sinking into quicksand. Every explanation was met with hostility and disbelief. By midnight, Amani was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Detective Morgan came by with a small packet of chips and a bottle of water. She wordlessly handed them to Amani. Though Amani was grateful, she couldn't ignore the sense that Morgan too believed Amani was just another teenage delinquent. Perhaps the detective was simply more polite about it. Shortly after, Mr. Clean arrived, accompanied by Dana. Imani had never been so relieved to see two familiar faces. Dana looked frantic, her usually neat braids frizzy at the edges, her eyes rimmed with the remnants of tears. She rushed to Imani, arms opening to hug her, only to be gently stopped by a uniformed officer. Imani gave her mother a tight, shaky smile from a distance. Mr. Klein stepped forward. He was a middle-aged white man with a kind, intelligent demeanor. He introduced himself to Detective Morgan and then turned to Imani. "Don't say anything else without me present," he whispered. Imani nodded, grateful for the guidance. Klein demanded to see the evidence they had against Imani. Officer O'Donnell offered vague references to the so-called eyewitness. Mr. Clean asked to see the footage from the store's security cameras. The officers claimed it was being reviewed, but Imani suspected they were stalling because it wouldn't show her at all. Eventually, Imani was placed under formal arrest, charged with suspicion of robbery, and scheduled for arraignment in a few days. The gravity of that moment struck Imani with physical force. She had never felt so powerless. Her mother's arms finally unfolded her, and Imani broke down in sobs. She knew in that moment she was entering a labyrinth of legal troubles she did not deserve. Detective Morgan escorted Imani to a cell apologetically. Because Imani was technically an adult by just a few months, she was placed in a holding cell with other adult female detainees, some of whom eyed her curiously. Imani sank onto a bench, arms hugging her own chest in a vain attempt to protect herself. She kept thinking about the CIA badge. If she could just speak to someone high enough in the agency to confirm her internship status, maybe all of this could be cleared up. But Aman also recalled the secrecy agreements she had signed. Would the agency even acknowledge her involvement? Would they protect her, or would they distance themselves? As the steel door clanged shut, Amani stared at the peeling paint on the far wall, her stomach churning. She wasn't just worried about the legal ramifications, she was worried about the future she'd worked so hard to build. A moment of dread flickered through her mind. Perhaps her acceptance to Howard could be revoked if she ended up with a criminal record, or the CIA might terminate her internship in order to avoid bad publicity. So many nightmares spun through her mind, and none of them ended well. Night stretched on, feeling endless. Amani tried to rest, but each time she drifted off, she jerked awake to the sound of keys rattling or other detainees shuffling. Her mother's tearful face floated in her thoughts, fueling Iman's own tears, though she tried hard not to cry in front of strangers. She wondered if tomorrow would bring the exoneration she so desperately prayed for, or if it would only tighten the noose around her neck. 2 days later, Imani found herself in the backseat of a sheriff's van, hands cuffed in front of her, en route to the E. Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse in downtown D.C. for her arraignment. The building itself had always struck her as grand and imposing. She remembered passing by it on field trips or while exploring the city with her mother. Now, she was approaching it in shackles. Her mother and Mr. Clean had fought to get her bail set, but the judge at the preliminary hearing seemed unconvinced by Aman's protestations of innocence, particularly since the prosecution, represented by an assistant district attorney who seemed oddly aggressive, argued Imani was a flight risk due to her questionable government ID. The result was Imani spending 2 nights in county lockup, a harrowing experience for an 18-year-old who had done nothing wrong. During that time, Imani had overheard passing comments about the 2 arresting officers, O'Donnell and Marston. Some of the older detainees whispered that these officers had a history of roughing up suspects and falsifying reports, particularly in cases that involved young black men and women in D.C. Imani felt a new kind of anger settle over her. She vowed that if she ever got out of this mess, she would do everything in her power to expose whatever corruption lay beneath the surface. Mr. Clean visited Imani in jail just the previous evening. "I requested surveillance footage from the convenience store," he told her in a low voice through the security glass. They claim the footage isn't available because the cameras were out of service. We'll keep digging. There must be some other way to prove your alibi. Amani nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. My school records, she said. They'll show I was in class. That's next on my list, Mr. Clean assured her. I have your attendance log. We have statements from your teachers, your debate team, the bus driver if we can get them to talk. The problem is the prosecution is leaning heavily on an eyewitness account. We'll have to discredit that or prove the witness is mistaken or lying. Imani leaned her forehead against the glass. I'm just scared, she admitted. What if that's not enough? Mr. Klein's gaze was sympathetic. We'll do everything we can. Hang in there. Now, as she neared the federal courthouse, Aman couldn't help but notice the swarm of local reporters with cameras stationed near the entrance. She overheard a deputy mention something about a high-profile case also on the docket that day, a big political scandal that had drawn major media attention. Amani fervently hoped no one would care enough to point their cameras at her. The last thing she wanted was to become a media spectacle. She was led into a sterile hallway where she waited with other detainees for their turn in front of the judge. Davina was in the gallery, Imani knew. Mr. Clean would be beside her as soon as they stepped into the courtroom. Imani tried to steady her breathing, going over the facts in her head like a debate rehearsal. She imagined bullet points. I was at school all day, I have witnesses, teachers, students, staff, the store's cameras should show I wasn't there, the CIA internship ID is real, not fake. Yet she couldn't ignore the horrifying possibility that her CIA affiliation might never be confirmed publicly if the agency decided to keep her at arm's length. Amani had no way of forcing them to speak up. She was on her own unless the agency decided otherwise. Finally, Aman's name was called. She was escorted into the courtroom, heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. She glanced around, spotting her mother in the first row, eyes swollen from crying but resolute, hands clasped in her lap. Mr. Clean nodded at Imani in silent encouragement. The judge, a stern-faced woman with a commanding presence, asked Iman to approach with her counsel. The assistant district attorney, Miss Branson, an ambitious woman in her late 30s, began laying out the charges. The defendant, Amani Carter, is accused of participating in an armed robbery at the convenience store on 3rd and Jefferson. An eyewitness placed her at the scene, and she was found fleeing the vicinity shortly after the crime took place. We request that the charges move forward and that bail remain denied, given the suspicious nature of the government ID found on her person. Iman's pulse roared in her ears. The words armed robbery made her stomach churn. She had never touched a gun in her life. This was madness. Mr. Clean stepped forward, clear-voiced and resolute. Your Honor, this is a grave misunderstanding. My client maintains her innocence. She was in school for the entire day, engaged in supervised activities. We have more than a dozen individuals willing to testify to that fact. Furthermore, the ID Miss Carter carries is not a fake. She is enrolled in a legitimate government internship, which can be verified. Miss Branson raised an eyebrow, shifting her gaze from Mr. Clean to Amani. Verified by whom? The defendant refuses to name the contact who provided this so-called CIA badge. Iman's stomach clenched. She tried to tell the officers about her CIA contact, a liaison named Miss Harrington who oversaw the high-potential outreach program, but Miss Harrington had made Amani sign documents stating she would never reveal program specifics without prior agency approval. Imani had called Miss Harrington from jail but only got her voicemail. She left one desperate whispered message, hoping someone in the agency would step up. The judge tapped her gavel lightly on the block. I will not deny this is an unusual situation. However, Miss Carter is only 18, has no prior record, and appears to have strong ties to this community. I'm inclined to grant bail if the defense can provide some credible verification of her identity and internship. Clean cleared his throat. We request a small recess, Your Honor, so that we may gather additional verification. The judge considered for a moment. Very well, we'll reconvene in 2 days. Miss Carter will remain in custody until that time unless the defense can provide immediate proof of her CIA affiliation or a surety bond. Next case. With that, Amani was guided out, tears burning her eyes. Dana tried to rush forward, but security held her back. Imani felt her heart sink further. She was so close to being released, yet still locked in a cage. Every passing day felt like another piece of her future crumbling. Back in the holding area, Imani was exhausted. She rested her head in her hands, trying to block out the humiliating clangs of the jail cell gate. She had to find a way to get someone from the CIA to intervene. She worried that the agency would not want to bring public attention to a minor operative or an intern with minimal clearance. But Iman's break came late that evening. She was woken by a guard telling her she had a visitor. Rubbing her eyes, Imani walked to the visitation room. Behind the plexiglass sat a woman in a crisp navy suit, her hair in a tight bun. Iman's eyes widened in recognition. Miss Harrington, her CIA liaison. Imani quickly slid into the seat and lifted the phone receiver. Imani, Miss Harrington said, her voice subdued, I just heard what happened. I'm sorry I couldn't get here sooner. Imani pressed her free hand to the glass. Thank God you came. They think I robbed that store. They won't believe my ID is real. They're charging me with armed robbery. Her voice cracked. Please, you have to help me. Miss Harrington nodded. I'm going to do what I can. This is a delicate matter. I've been authorized to confirm your internship to the judge, but that's about it. This isn't how we like to handle such issues, but given the circumstances, your freedom is more important. She paused, scanning Aman's weary face. You should never have been arrested in the first place. Amani exhaled slowly, tears of relief threatening. She wanted to grab Miss Harrington's hand, but the plexiglass barrier made that impossible. Thank you, she whispered. Please hurry. The next day, Amani was informed that Miss Harrington had provided a formal affidavit verifying Aman's involvement in the CIA's high-potential outreach program. She even included Aman's acceptance letter, redacting sensitive content. With that affidavit, Mr. Klein demanded an emergency hearing. The judge, swayed by the official documentation, granted Amani bail. The moment Aman emerged onto the courthouse steps, her mother enveloped her in a hug so fierce it took Aman's breath away. Reporters milling around for the high-profile political case snapped a few pictures of Amani and her mother, but Amani did her best to keep her head down. She just wanted to go home, take a hot shower, and sleep in her own bed. But even as she walked away with Dana, Amani knew it was far from over. She had to return for a full hearing. The official trial was scheduled for the following week. That evening, Amani sat on their worn living room couch, Mr. Klein seated across from her and Dana. A stack of paperwork was laid out on the coffee table. Dana offered Mr. Klein a cup of coffee, and he accepted with a tired smile. Here's the plan, Klein said gently, stirring in some sugar. The prosecution is building their entire case on this alleged eyewitness, plus the fact that Amani was near the store at the time. We'll counter with Iman's school attendance, statements from teachers, and the fact that she only got off the bus near the store that day by coincidence. We show the time logs from the bus route, the sign-out sheet from her debate meeting, everything. We'll also emphasize Miss Harrington's affidavit proving Aman's CIA internship is real. It diffuses the argument that Aman's ID was fake. What we need, however, is to poke holes in their eyewitness's story. The store cameras were allegedly broken, so there's no direct video evidence. That makes the eyewitness even more important. If we can discredit them, the prosecution's case might collapse. Imani listened intently, her eyes flicking between Mr. Klein and her mother. Dana squeezed Iman's hand in moral support. Iman's heart pounded at the thought of going through an actual trial with testimonies and cross-examination, but she knew it was her only shot to clear her name. Then there was another looming question, her CIA affiliation. The agency had helped get her out on bail, but Imani didn't know how much they would do beyond that. Miss Harrington had told her to keep the badge hidden from the media if at all possible, but Iman had a feeling that once she took the stand, everything would be laid bare. The tension of that weighed heavily on her mind. Still, Amani felt a surge of resolve. She wasn't just fighting for her own freedom now, she was fighting for the principle that justice should not be so easily derailed by prejudice. She also knew that O'Donnell and Marston had to be held accountable for their actions, though she was uncertain how to proceed on that front. Imani vowed not to let it slide once she cleared her name. The day of the trial arrived in a haze of tension and hope. Imani woke up that morning, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. She dressed in a simple navy blouse and black pants, her mother fussing over her hair to make sure every curl was neatly in place. The entire ride to the courthouse was silent, save for Aman's shaky breathing and Davina's anxious fiddling with the edges of her purse. Outside the courthouse, Imani spotted the same gaggle of reporters. They seemed more focused on the continuing political scandal, but a few recognized Imani as the teen CIA impersonator, a sensational headline some tabloid had run the previous day. Flashes went off, and Iman instinctively ducked her head, pressing forward into the building. Mr. Clean greeted them in the hallway. "Ready?" he asked, though he could see the fear in Aman's eyes. She nodded, swallowing hard. The three of them entered the courtroom, which was moderately full. Imani glimpsed Miss Harrington seated unobtrusively in the back. That alone gave Imani a sliver of reassurance. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Once seated, Miss Branson, the assistant district attorney, wasted no time. She gave a confident opening statement, portraying Imani as a cunning young woman who had lied about her government credentials, exploited her youth to evade suspicion, and orchestrated a robbery that netted a few thousand from the convenience store's register. She then called Officer O'Donnell to testify about the arrest. O'Donnell took the stand with an air of righteous indignation. He described how Aman was loitering suspiciously near the crime scene, how she attempted to flee, and how she produced a fake CIA badge upon questioning. Listening to his testimony, Iman's hands balled into fists under the table. The officer was blatantly twisting the truth. She recalled how he had never once given her a chance to explain. She also remembered how, ironically, calm she had been, trying to comply to avoid escalation. But O'Donnell's narrative painted her as hostile and deceptive. Next, Miss Branson called the eyewitness. A middle-aged man named Travis Brown stepped forward, wearing a rumpled shirt and shifting his eyes nervously. Imani studied him, she'd never seen this man before. With prompting from Miss Branson, Brown stated he saw Imani dash out of the store right after the robbery alarm sounded. Iman's heart thumped. This was a blatant lie, she'd never gone inside that store on that day at all. When Mr. Klein had his turn, he cross-examined Brown with a measured intensity. "Mr. Brown," he began, "you claim you saw my client, Miss Carter, exiting the store right after the alarm, correct?" Brown nodded vigorously, refusing to make eye contact with Imani. "Yes, that's correct." "What were you doing in the area at that time?" Brown hesitated. "I was just walking by. I'd stepped out for a smoke break from my job at the auto shop down the street." Klein flipped through some papers. "The auto shop, Goodwin's Garage, correct?" Brown nodded. "Yes, it's closed on Mondays." A murmur spread through the gallery. Brown swallowed hard. It was the day before that." "The timeline is, I might be mixing up the days," he stammered. Klein pressed on. "So your statement to the police that you saw Miss Carter on Monday, the day of the robbery, was inaccurate, or perhaps you never saw her at all?" Brown floundered, glancing at Miss Branson for help. The assistant DA shot him a warning glare, but the damage was done. Everyone could see the cracks forming in the testimony. Klein then introduced Iman's airtight alibi, signed affidavits from her teachers confirming she was present all day, statements from classmates who saw her board the bus after her debate meeting, and a record from the transit system verifying Imani used her student pass at a specific time consistent with her story. The judge leaned forward with growing interest. Finally, Miss Harrington was called to the stand. She verified that Imani was indeed part of a legitimate CIA outreach program. She explained in cautious but definitive terms that Iman's badge was not a fake. The hush in the courtroom was palpable. Though Miss Harrington didn't reveal the full scope of Aman's training or the agency's interest in her abilities, she provided enough detail to demolish the prosecution's claim that Imani was an imposter. As Miss Harrington left the stand, Imani felt a wave of relief and a surge of anger all at once. The entire prosecution hinged on painting her as a liar and a thief, yet here was concrete evidence of her integrity. She wondered if Miss Branson would back down or double down. In a last-ditch effort, Miss Branson tried to salvage the case. Your Honor, even if Miss Carter's CIA internship is real, that doesn't preclude the possibility she committed this crime. We have an eyewitness. The judge cleared her throat, eyes narrowed. An eyewitness whose testimony is riddled with inconsistencies and whose timeline for being in the vicinity does not match the day the store was open and operating. Counsel, do you have any other evidence to provide? Miss Branson glanced at her notes, face tight. At this time, no, Your Honor. The judge's gaze swung toward Imani, then to the jury, and finally back to Miss Branson. In the absence of credible evidence linking Miss Carter to the robbery, and with the defense's compelling alibi, I see no grounds to proceed with these charges. Case dismissed. The gavel's crack echoed in the silent room. A moment later, Imani gasped, tears streaming down her face as she realized she was free. Dana let out a sob of relief. Reporters in the back began snapping pictures and taking notes in a flurry. Mr. Clean hugged Amon's shoulder, whispering, "It's over." But Imani felt it wasn't truly over until O'Donnell and Marston faced the consequences of their aggressive and unwarranted arrest. For now, though, she had at least reclaimed her freedom. As Imani prepared to leave the courtroom, a surge of triumph and anger mingled inside her. People were crowding around, some offering congratulations, others snapping photos. Imani noticed Miss Harrington slip out quietly, as if not wanting to attract notice. Imani caught her eye for a fleeting moment, nodding in gratitude. But before Imani could exit, a sudden hush fell upon the crowd in the hallway. O'Donnell and Marston stood near the elevator, speaking in low, urgent tones with Miss Branson, their faces grim. In that instant, Iman's mind flashed to the rumors she'd heard in jail. These officers had done something like this before. She recalled the hush-hush stories of them planting evidence or using fake witnesses to secure convictions. Mr. Clean, noticing Imani's stare, touched her arm. "It might be worth looking into," he murmured, "but let's focus on your well-being first." Imani nodded, though she filed it away in her mind. She wouldn't forget. On the courthouse steps, Imani was ambushed by a few reporters shouting questions. One particular journalist from a local station asked, "Miss Carter, how does it feel to have your charges dropped? Are you really with the CIA?" Imani blinked, uncertain how to respond. Mr. Klein stepped in, providing a canned statement. Imani was an innocent young woman, incorrectly identified, the justice system worked, etc. Imani offered a quick smile, then let Dana guide her away. Later that day, Imani found herself back home, curled up under a blanket with a mug of tea. She was physically and emotionally drained, but at least she was in the warmth of her own living room. Dana sat beside her, stroking her shoulder. The news was on TV, a broadcast covering local stories. Suddenly, Iman's case popped up on the screen. The cheer read, "Charges dropped against teen accused of robbery, CIA internship confirmed." Imani winced at the attention, but a part of her felt a swell of pride. She had been vindicated. However, the victory felt incomplete. Imani mulled over what had happened. The police had targeted her with no real cause, ignored her evidence, and refused to check a single fact. Why was it purely racial profiling, or was there something more? Regardless, Imani believed some sort of accountability was in order. She wanted to file a formal complaint or maybe even a civil lawsuit, but she wasn't sure if that was wise or if it would open her to new dangers. A few days later, Imani received a call from Miss Harrington. "Imani, how are you holding up?" she asked. Imani swallowed. "Okay, I guess. Just trying to process everything. I spoke with my superiors at Langley. They're aware of the situation. The agency doesn't usually get involved in local police matters, but we want you to know we support you. You're still part of the high potential outreach program if you want to continue." Relief washed over Imani. She had worried that her run-in with the law would derail her CIA prospects. "I do," she said softly. "I want to continue, but I also want to." She paused, unsure if it was safe to share her thoughts about pushing for accountability. Miss Harrington cut in gently. "You have every right to seek justice, Imani, but tread carefully. Some of these local issues can be messy. If you decide to pursue a complaint or a lawsuit, the agency can't officially back it. However, we won't stand in your way." After the call ended, Imani felt both gratitude and frustration. The CIA would neither hinder nor help her, but at least they weren't penalizing her for speaking out. That night, Imani and her mother sat at the kitchen table, discussing their options with Mr. Clean. They ultimately decided to file an official complaint with the DC Police Complaints Board and to consider a civil rights lawsuit for wrongful arrest and emotional distress. When news broke about Iman's plans, the media latched on to the story again. It was unusual to see an 18-year-old who was also an active CIA intern taking on the police force. Some outlets cast Himi as a hero, a symbol for those who had been wronged by law enforcement. Others questioned her motives, accusing her of trying to profit from her ordeal or stirring up trouble. Imani did her best to ignore the chatter, focusing on her upcoming high school graduation and her near future at Howard University. But fate had more twists in store. One afternoon, Imani was sitting in Mr. Klein's cramped office while he discussed the lawsuit. The phone rang. Mr. Clean answered, listened for a moment, then his eyes widened. "Right," he said curtly, "we'll be right there." He hung up and fixed Imani with a serious look. "That was Detective Morgan. She wants to see you. Says it's urgent." Imani felt a cold tingle run down her spine. Why on earth would the detective who had processed her arrest want to talk to her now? Detective Morgan met Imani and Mr. Clean at a small coffee shop near the precinct, wearing plain clothes to avoid scrutiny. She was cautious, scanning the room before sliding into a booth. Once they were seated, she leaned in. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she said quietly, "but I'm tired of watching innocent people get railroaded. I've got some information about O'Donnell and Marin." Imani and Mr. Clean exchanged a look. "We're listening," he said. Morgan took a deep breath. "They're part of an informal network of officers who, let's say, have a habit of padding their arrest stats. They target easy marks, young black people, immigrants, folks less likely to have the resources to fight back. They get promotions and commendations for crime reduction. The eyewitness who testified against you, a paid informant. They use him whenever they need a quick ID to seal a case." A swirl of nausea swept over Imani. "That's how they build cases?" she asked, voice trembling with anger. Morgan nodded grimly. "I've been investigating quietly, but you know how the blue wall works. I've got enough partial evidence to raise suspicion, but not a slam-dunk case. If you move forward with your lawsuit and complaint, and if we pull our evidence, we might be able to blow this open. But we'll need more documentation, testimonies, anything we can find that ties these officers to misconduct." Mr. Clean rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Are you prepared to go on record with this information?" Morgan hesitated. "I have to tread very carefully. My own career could be on the line. But yes, I'm ready if it means finally exposing their corruption. I'll do it." Imani felt a surge of admiration for Morgan. She'd initially dismissed her as just another part of the system, but here she was, risking her position to do the right thing. "What can I do to help?" Imani asked, determined. Morgan leveled her gaze at Imani. "Your story is key. You not only have proof of a false arrest, but your CIA affiliation has drummed up enough publicity that if you take the stand, people will listen. Then there's the matter of their fabricated evidence and Brown's perjury. If we can find others who've gone through the same ordeal and are willing to testify, we can build a class action suit." Iman's mind whirled. She pictured how huge this could become. It was frightening and exhilarating at the same time. She thought about her own sleepless nights in jail, how powerless she had felt. No one should have to endure that for a crime they didn't commit. She made her decision in that moment. "I'm in," she said. "I want these officers held accountable. Let's do it." Thus began a whirlwind of clandestine meetings and phone calls. Detective Morgan provided Imani and Mr. Clean with lists of potential victims, names of people she suspected O'Donnell and Marston had wrongfully targeted. Some had left the city, while others were still languishing in legal limbo, lacking the means or knowledge to fight back. Iman and Dana spent evenings calling these individuals, listening to harrowing stories of intimidation, false charges, and coerced guilty pleas. Some were reluctant to come forward, fearful of police retaliation. Others leapt at the chance to clear their names. As the days turned into weeks, Imani juggled finishing her last semester of high school, preparing for Howard University orientation, and building a coalition of people who had been victimized by unscrupulous cops. The local media caught wind of it, dubbing Imani the teen whistleblower. She hated the sensational label but recognized its power to draw attention to the truth. The city buzzed with tension. The D.C. Police Department launched an internal investigation. O'Donnell and Marston were placed on administrative leave, an act Imani knew was largely symbolic. She also received ominous phone calls at odd hours, no caller ID, just heavy breathing or whispered threats telling her to drop the lawsuit. She reported each incident to Mr. Clean, who urged her to be careful. Detective Morgan suspected it might be associates of O'Donnell and Marston trying to intimidate Imani. All this weighed on Aman's mental health. She woke up most nights drenched in sweat, nightmares replaying the moment she was arrested. Sometimes she dreamed of stepping into the convenience store, only for O'Donnell to corner her. In these dreams, Imani would scream for help, but her voice would vanish. Each morning, she fought to shake it off, telling herself she was safe now that she was fighting back. But some traumas lingered like ghosts, refusing to be exorcised by mere will alone. Through it all, Imani clung to her mother's love, Miss Harrington's guarded support, and her unwavering faith in her own sense of justice. She found moments of solace in her bedroom, where she tinkered with code-breaking puzzles from her CIA coursework or wrote in a journal about everything that had happened. She wrote about how surreal it felt to be both a teenage CIA intern and a civil rights crusader. She wrote about her classmates who treated her with a mixture of awe and caution. Most of them believed her story, they'd seen her at school after all, but Imani could tell some were uncomfortable with all the attention. When the day finally came for Aman to graduate from Benjamin Banneker Academic High School, she walked across the stage to cheers from her classmates and a standing ovation from the faculty. She accepted her diploma with trembling hands, tears in her eyes. This was the culmination of years of hard work, and yet part of her felt that her real battle was just beginning. In late June, Iman's civil lawsuit against officers O'Donnell, Marston, and the D.C. Police Department had its first major hearing. The city had filed a motion to dismiss, claiming Aman's allegations were unsubstantiated. But Imani and Mr. Clean showed up armed with statements from multiple victims, Detective Morgan's insider testimony, and tangible evidence tying the officers to repeated misconduct. The hearing was set in the same courthouse where Imani had once stood accused. Imani walked those halls with her head held high, wearing a crisp white blouse and black slacks. Her mother walked beside her, radiating a quiet determination. Mr. Klein carried a bulging briefcase, his expression confident. Inside the courtroom, Imani saw O'Donnell and Marston for the first time since her trial. They glared at her with undisguised hostility. They were accompanied by their legal counsel, a sharp-suited attorney who Imani recognized from high-profile cases defending police officers against misconduct claims. The tension was thick enough to taste. Detective Morgan was called to testify, recounting her observations of O'Donnell and Marston's questionable arrests, including Aman's. She described the pattern of behavior, the paid informant and the pressure to clean up the streets by any means necessary. Then Imani took the stand, describing her ordeal in detail, how she was arrested without cause, her pleas ignored, her legitimate ID dismissed as fake. Imani also spoke about her CIA internship, clarifying that while she couldn't disclose everything, her presence in that program was real, and it served as further proof that the officers had made no effort to verify her identity. Mr. Klein presented statements from half a dozen individuals who had faced false charges under O'Donnell and Marston's watch. Each story echoed Aman's intimidation, lies, flimsy evidence. Collectively, they painted a damning portrait of systematic misconduct. When the officer's attorney cross-examined Imani, he attempted to paint her as a troublemaker, suggesting she was fueling a media circus. Imani responded calmly, explaining that she wanted nothing more than to clear her name and prevent such injustices from happening to others. Her composure under questioning drew nods of approval from some spectators in the gallery. The pivotal moment came when the judge denied the city's motion to dismiss, citing substantial evidence that warranted a full trial. O'Donnell and Marston's expressions darkened. Imani felt a wave of relief. This meant her case would move forward, that she had successfully pushed past the first line of defense. Justice was inching closer. Over the following weeks, settlement talks began behind closed doors. The city, facing mounting public pressure, suggested a monetary settlement to Imani and the other plaintiffs, promising reforms. Imani and the group were torn. They needed real policy changes and a public admission of wrongdoing. Money alone wouldn't suffice. It was around this time that Imani received an unexpected invitation, a small ceremony at the local community center where a grassroots group fighting police corruption wanted to honor her for her courage. She was hesitant, wary of attracting more attention, but Dana encouraged her to go, saying Imani's story inspired hope for many people. The night of the ceremony, Imani found herself standing on a modest stage in front of a few dozen community activists, families, and neighbors. She saw tears in the eyes of some who had endured their own run-ins with corrupt policing. "I'm just an 18-year-old, Imani said into the microphone, voice trembling. "I never wanted to be in this position, but when the system tries to break you, sometimes you have no choice but to stand up. I'm grateful for everyone who's joined me in this fight." The applause was thunderous, but Amon's eyes locked on one figure in the back, Miss Harrington, who had slipped in quietly. She offered Imani a subtle nod of respect. Imani smiled, heartfelt. As summer deepened, Imani balanced her time between preparing for Howard University's orientation, continuing her CIA coursework, and finalizing details of the lawsuit. Rumors swirled that O'Donnell and Marston were under internal investigation for multiple counts of misconduct, with possible criminal charges looming. The tipping point arrived in August, nearly a year after Amon's fateful arrest. In a dramatic twist, Travis Brown, the false eyewitness who testified against Imani, agreed to a plea deal with the district attorney's office. In exchange for giving evidence against O'Donnell and Marston, Brown admitted he'd been paid by the officers to implicate Amon and others, providing details of their scheme. The city had no choice but to drop its defense of the officers. Within days, O'Donnell and Marston were arrested on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of perjury. The news exploded across local headlines: corrupt cops charged after teen whistleblower exposes lies. Imani felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. She took no joy in seeing people's lives ruined, but justice demanded accountability. The subsequent trial for O'Donnell and Marston was swift and damning. With Brown's testimony, Detective Morgan's investigation, and reams of evidence, the jury found both officers guilty. They were sentenced to prison terms, their badges stripped away. Watching the verdict on TV, Imani felt tears of relief wash over her. She remembered the day those two men had handcuffed her, how powerless she felt. Now the tables were turned, and they would face the consequences of their actions. In the aftermath, the city settled the civil lawsuit, offering a substantial sum not just to Imani but to every other plaintiff who had joined. More importantly, the settlement included legally binding agreements for police reform measures, stricter oversight on informant use, improved accountability protocols, and mandatory racial bias training. The mayor held a press conference, calling Iman's story a catalyst for meaningful change. Imani hoped that wasn't just political rhetoric. For Imani, the financial component of the settlement was significant enough to pay for college without loans and help her mother with overdue bills. But Imani felt her greatest victory was intangible: a sense of justice served. She'd stood up not just for herself but for a community at risk of being steamrolled by those sworn to protect and serve. Meanwhile, Imani prepared for a new chapter in her life. Her acceptance to Howard University was secure, her CIA internship ready to resume in a more official capacity. She spent the last days of summer packing her belongings, thinking back to the roller coaster year she'd endured. It had tested every part of her courage, her resilience, her faith in justice. She'd emerged stronger and more determined than ever to use her gifts for good. In late August, Imani strolled across the Howard University campus for the first time as an enrolled student. The sun was shining bright, illuminating the historic buildings and the lively throng of students moving in. Imani felt a surge of pride to be part of this esteemed institution, a place that had nurtured many civil rights icons and brilliant minds. She found her dorm, introduced herself to her roommate, a sociology major named Shanice, who recognized Imani from the news but played it cool, and started unpacking. That evening, Imani slipped out for a walk around campus, the early twilight casting long shadows across the quad. She paused near the library, breathing in the warm honeysuckle-scented air. For the first time in what felt like ages, she felt at peace. Her phone buzzed. It was Miss Harrington. Amani answered, smiling. "I was just thinking about you, Amani," she said. Miss Harrington's voice held a note of pride. "I wanted to congratulate you. Starting college is a big step." Amani looked down at the CIA badge in her wallet, remembering all it symbolized. "I still can't believe how far I've come," she admitted. "A few months ago, I was afraid I'd end up in prison for a crime I didn't commit. Now I'm a freshman at Howard with an internship at the CIA. It's surreal sometimes." "Life throws curveballs," Miss Harrington said. "You handled yours with remarkable grace. The agency is proud to have you. You have a bright future ahead." Ending the call, Amani slipped her phone back in her pocket. She recalled the chaotic day of her arrest, how the weight of injustice had pressed down on her chest. And then she remembered the final day in court, that collective intake of breath when she flashed her real CIA badge, shattering the false narrative. A warm pride spread through her. She had won both freedom and injustice. Under the vast night sky, Amani felt a new sense of purpose rising within her. She was still young, still growing, but she had proven that one voice, even one as small and unassuming as a teenage girl's, could stand against a system and spark meaningful change. People had rallied behind her, and together they had carved a path for truth. Tomorrow, Amani would start classes. Soon, she would resume her CIA training modules, possibly even working on a specialized project that Miss Harrington hinted might utilize Amon's analytical genius. The journey ahead was full of unknowns, but she welcomed it. She had a second chance, an even stronger foundation, and the unwavering knowledge that with determination, allies, and a belief in what's right, even the most powerful walls can be brought down. Imani Carter, once an 18-year-old wrongly accused, had stepped out of the shadows of injustice and into the light of a promising future. And in that brightness, she knew lay the seed of profound change, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's gavel struck. Case dismissed. Imani exhaled sharply, barely believing the words. She had fought, she had endured, and now she had won. The officers who tried to ruin her life were facing justice, and the system that had failed her was finally being exposed. Stepping outside, she felt the weight of it all lift. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about every person who had been silenced, every name that never got a second chance. But this is just the beginning, because when one voice speaks out, it inspires 100 more. What do you think? Was justice truly served? Let me know in the comments, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story from Dark Stories. See you in the next one.